The Worst Equestrian Necromancer, Chapter 11, Pirates of Ponyville. Celestia had a headache. This wasn't that unusual since running a country was an awful lot of work. However, today it was a special brand of headache, one that was rare and came with an uncertain amount of joy. This was because she was having what the castle staff call a death day. After the return of Princess Luna, the fact that Rhaegar was a bona fide necromancer had become the worst kept secret in Canterlot. She had managed to hide the facts from those most likely to worry, but several guards and nobles had figured out who the thrice accursed demon was that Luna had talked about freely, until Celestia had explained the situation to her. But what was causing her headache right now was the full-sized galleon that had recently surfaced in the Ponyville Lake. This would be less jarring if it wasn't for two things. One, the lake was barely big enough to allow a rowboat the ability to take anything more than a quick jaunt, making the galleon nearly touch the sides of the surprisingly deep lake. And two, it was crewed by skeleton pirates. In the last 3 hours, they had launched a barrage of small skeletal rodents at Ponyville, and in one case a very confused living donkey who landed in Sugar Cube Corner. This had caused Twilight to embark on a quest to catch the evil necromancer responsible. She had attempted to interrogate the crew who had told her that their master was indisposed by the dark and mysterious tones of the Canterlot Orchestra. This had not only confused Twilight, but it caused her friend Rarity to have a full conversation with the crew about the varying pieces of work that the orchestra had produced over the years. They ended up agreeing that though they had been in a recent slump, their work on the soundtrack for The Phantom of Music was excellent. So now Celestia was having to try and calm down Twilight without mentioning Rhaegar, figuring out how a galleon that by all appearances belonged in a museum had appeared in the lake, and contacted Rhaegar, who was apparently listening to her favorite orchestra. So she was waiting in her tea room trying to reach Rhaegar while responding to the frankly massive amount of paperwork that she had received from Mayor Mare. Most had simple answers, but a few required more nuanced responses. Like what to do about the skeletons raiding the local comic store and stealing all of the comics, but leaving behind enough bits to cover the comics, repairs, and sending the owners full to college. She stared at the letter in a mixture of confusion and pride. On one hoof, Rhaegar had basically committed a minor invasion of her kingdom for comic books, but on the other hoof, he had paid for them and left what one could call a tip. Or possibly he had no clue how much comic books cost, if Black Sun was to be believed. She sighed and tried her communication orb again. This time the piano only sounded for a moment before Rhaegar appeared in the corner of her room. He was wearing a full suit, complete with a vest, top hat, and a monocle. He spread his arms wide, gesturing with what appeared to be a solid gold cane that he was holding.
Oh, how wonderful it is to see you, Princess! Rhaegar was just thinking of calling you to speak of the great improvements in the latest showing by your orchestra. Rhaegar found that the pieces of Beethoven were nearly perfect.
Celestia paused. The latest showing was in Canterlot. She had assumed that he was listening to a recording, or maybe one of his many crystal videos. She had learned long ago that if Rhaegar was having a movie night, you couldn't interrupt it, though you could join in. They had several shared movie nights through the communication orbs. It was annoying that he refused to watch something with her, unless it was something that she had already seen. However, she desperately wanted to see some of the recordings that he had talked about but hadn't shared. She shook her head, trying to snap out of her thoughts. Why was she thinking about this anyway? She was going to meet him in person soon enough. She instead focused on the task at hand.
Oh, were you present at the concerts? I wouldn't expect you to make the trip to Canterlot on your own.
Rhaegar nodded.
Originally, Rhaegar was going to go with Black Sun, but unfortunately he said something came up. So Rhaegar simply took his newest apprentice to the show. She enjoyed seeing how they captivated their audience.
Celestia really wanted to ask about his newest apprentice, but she needed to deal with a minor catastrophe that was going on in Ponyville first.
Yes, well, I wish that this was purely a social call, but there is an issue that requires a few questions.
Rhaegar tilted his head to the side before he vehemently nodded.
Rhaegar must assume that you mean his latest act of evil.
He raised his hands in a menacing pose, causing Celestia to giggle. After a moment, he lowered his arms and nonchalantly leaned on his cane.
Yes, Rhaegar wanted to try a repair spell on a large scale and found that the Dangerous Dreams former pirate ship was the perfect test subject. Since it was originally sunk by a large magical burst from Nightmare Moon, Rhaegar repurposed the dark energy to make a few minions from the poor souls aboard. Some of them requested to go back, but it was mostly due to their skeletal nature. Rhaegar has found most people prefer to be whole when they return, but unfortunately that is difficult.
At this, he lowered his head, and Celestia noticed his jaw moving as he quietly spoke to himself. While Celestia was a master of lip reading, it was somewhat difficult when your target had no lips. After a moment, she softly cleared her throat.
Rhaegar?
He jolted up, nodding to Celestia. She worried for a moment about her friends before trying to push through. As always, Equestria came first.
As much as I would love to ask about that, I must first clear the air. Why did your new crew launch rodents at Ponyville?
Rhaegar paused.
Rhaegar doesn't remember.
Then he snapped up.
Oh crap, Rhaegar meant for that test fire to go east, not north. Rhaegar apologizes. He simply wanted to make sure that the rodents would be able to survive falls, as his current lair has many cliffs, and he wants to ensure that his pets would be safe. The easiest way was to test some volunteers in an environment where he could easily retrieve them. They were supposed to land in Black Sun's garden.
Celestia relaxed, content with the answer. This seemed like a normal plan for Rhaegar, foolhardy, slightly insane, and silly. She had one last question, though.
And the donkey?
Rhaegar paused.
Yes, the donkey. He may have boarded the ship and my crew was very protective of their ship. Rhaegar believes that they said they repelled boarders? They believe it was in self-defense.
Celestia nodded.
Fair enough. I believe I can fix all of that easily enough, Rhaegar. Though you still have one more problem.
Rhaegar tilted his head at her.
Really? Rhaegar was unaware of any problems that he had that would warrant a mayor such as yourself hearing of them.
Celestia paused at the implications of his other problems, but decided to simply warn him instead of probing.
Well, you have been noticed by my own dear students. She has apparently enlisted Black Sun to help find your, and I quote here, evil lair of untold horrors, and left not too long ago.
Rhaegar's jaw opened wide. Then he belted out an enormous laugh.
Yeah, Rhaegar cannot wait. Oh, he hopes Black Sun takes the scenic route, though. Rhaegar must prepare.
He gives Celestia a full bow, doffing his hat with emotion.
If you'll excuse me, your radiance.
She nodded, hiding the blush at his simple comments. As he faded from the room, she sighed. After a moment, she stood up.
By Faust, Celestia, get a hold of yourself. It's not like he means anything by it.
And with that, she walked out to personally meet with the mayor. Somewhere in the jungles of the south, Black Sun was smiling around the machete in his mouth as he carved a path through the jungle. Twilight followed behind, furiously scribbling in her notebook about all the various fauna that she had encountered thus far. He paused, as the ruins that he had lived in only a decade prior came into view, then returned his machete to its sheath after slicing through the last of the undergrowth. "So, Twy, how do you feel about exploring old necromantic tombs?" he asked. Her own smile answered him better than words ever could. Who knows if they actually like each other? They've been talking decade after decade, so it is a possibility. Anywho, let's get on to our enchanted donators. Top donators are 630, J10 Man, Darkside, Only One Thing, Dash of Evergreen, and Ceru Orion. Rayden, Narwhals, Blackmoonheart, Pastel Skies, also Nolan, Stu Hex, Swordbrother and Mordred, Omicron Lyre, Will, Chris, Twinkie, Hadzaza, Riot Soul, Iron Sky, Badass Waffle, and many more super sweet people. Thank you all so much for watching this video and live life to the fullest.